that front, as in keep the costs low, but we still have so much work in the background that we're doing to make sure that people actually get the benefits for healthcare. So yeah, it's always the interesting aspect of our job is how to keep the costs low, but still make sure that people are covered and they have the necessary cover when it's actually needed.
Yeah. I think something also interesting in the healthcare space, like as you say, like you pay contributions to a medical scheme, but it doesn't mean that you get a claim from the medical scheme every year. And I think some people struggle with that because they're like, I'm paying so much money and, like, I'm not even using this. And there's that element of insurance that comes in, right? In the sense that you generally have 80% of people that pay for the 20% who get sick, right? And the reason you pay in some years and you never take out is, well, at some stage you are going to be a person taking out.
Especially when you get older.
Exactly. And so as a young person, you often are paying in money for your older self in a way. You're saying, okay, I'm not experiencing heavy morbidity right now because I'm young, and we know that health is related to age. But in future years, young people are going to be contributing so that I get benefits that I need.
I think the other thing we're also missing in the healthcare space is people don't see the actual invoice when they go to hospital. Like, I'm like, if you can see how much hospital admissions cost, then you'd understand why you need medical care.
I remember in my grandfather died a couple of years ago, and I remember looking at the invoice of his medical expenses in the last year of his life. And I think it was like 2.5 million. And I was like, he never contributed that to the medical scheme. He was he made a net profit from the medical scheme. And I think people don't see that, and so it's a very interesting space. Also, healthcare is also deeply emotional, right? People are very emotional about their health.
And not rational.
No, and I think, like, I get that, right? Because you can't do anything in life unless you're healthy. Because your health enables your life. And so it's an interesting space. And so we've spoken about sort of this benefit design. So let's say you're wanting to price this benefit.
Yes.
Right. How do you go about pricing something? So, I mean, you can give a simple example. Like, let's say, for example, you wanted to price a maternity benefit.
So first you have to get the data. I mean, our work is based on everything is sort of data related. You need to show proof of the cost and whatever. But so we need the underlying data, and then we have to determine the utilization, the expected utilization. So who's going to use this benefit and how often are they going to use it? And I mean, if it's maternity, then we know you're looking at the female population, but also their age group. How are your members looking? How old are they?
Yes.
So that also that determines the frequency, the expected frequency, and then obviously the costs that are related to whatever benefit you are offering. If it's admissions, if it's scans. What are those expected
a journey there, right? Which I think is something that's very intrinsic to healthcare. Is we have that element of like a protocol or formulary, which are very sort of health heavy words. But that protocol is saying, if we design a benefit, this is kind of how the member has a journey to experience. For a mother, it'd be like, okay, you go have a scan, and then you go have a scan a couple of weeks later or months later, and then there's various things, there's tests you can have, etc., and then there's the birthing event.
Yes.
And you sort of price each of those aspects using the utilization and the cost data.
Yeah. I mean, if a scheme doesn't have that data, we have the privilege of using other schemes if we have access to that data.
Yes.
Obviously taking POPI Act into account.
Always copy.
But and regulation. That's an answer.
Oh my goodness. Having a whole podcast in regulation, I think.
So it is a journey. So you almost need to understand the medical journey yourself. But obviously,
really what you love, right?
Yes,
given that you so just in healthcare, you're like, I feel like I'm a doctor and an actuary.
But best of both worlds. I don't have to deal with blood.
Oh goodness, no.
Yeah, so I mean, it's understanding the medical journey of it, and then obviously putting a cost to it, and then determining how a member's going to fund it.
Yeah.
And that's when the contribution increases aspect comes into it. So it's very data intense and very analytical, but I mean it's an enjoyable exercise that we just do on an annual basis, and every year it's different. The regulation changes every year, so you're just constantly learning new things. I mean, that's why I guess with also the actuarial exams, they're just constantly changing.
They have
because the industry changes so quickly. So it's that, and then we get to determining what the contribution increases, which is very it's also an intense process on its own.
And there's a lot of factors you have to take into account there, right? Because there's so many different stakeholders that sort of use that information. And it affects selling and people buying down and all those sort of things,
in my space, my biggest stakeholder that we always have sort of big debates with are the marketing guys, because they have
because they're the ones you have to go and be like, buy this product, why start it?
But what's important is having to explain it in English, taking it from actuarial terms and then explaining it in English to people that do not necessarily have the technical or analytical background. I think that's actually the hardest part of my job, is having to translate your calculations, whether the benefit is affordable or not. Having to sell that to the different stakeholders. They all are impacted differently. So that's, I think, the hardest part of my job, is having to explain yourself and explain the numbers in the language that makes sense to a non-actuarial person. But it's quite rewarding though,
So it's a lot of work, I'm sure. Those pricing seasons can be...
it's the marketing meetings that are always fun.
I feel like you go in there and you have to fight.
It's like you have to defend yourselves.
But I think also something that's quite interesting, just to highlight, and I know it's been said, but when it comes to pricing, and we've talked about this being a key function, a few things that you look at the most, right, are your frequency or your utilization, and then your costs. And those are the two things that drive price, right? And I think often, when I'm lecturing this, people are like, oh, pricing is so complex. And I'm like, there is complexity there. When you're looking at statistical distributions, as you say, for maternity, you're looking at, okay, what ages are we looking at for females having children? You're not looking generally at 50-year-olds, right? And yet you can have an outlier where there is an older female that's like, has had a child. So it's looking at these distributions. So it's very deeply statistical. But at its core, it's saying, okay, how often is this thing going to happen? And when it does happen, how many months are going to cost? And I think that distilling it down to that core sort of definition is really important, because that could be understood by anyone. And that's I guess what you also have to communicate in these marketing sort of conversations. Say the numbers are saying this, the utilization has increased or the cost has increased, and this is why the contribution has increased.
And it's also just it's having to decide which is more important as well. Maternity talks to the female population, but then the benefits that only talk to the male population. But you also sort of have to play that role now in deciding which one is more. It's not our role to decide, but we do.
Well, you have to, because you have a lot of have to do, right? And I think something that's also interesting just to note there is if a benefit is specifically for females, for example, maternity, it's still paid for by the male population, right? So it's basically like, let's say it costs 15 Rand per month per life. Everyone is paying 15 Rand, not just the females, but likewise for male specific diseases, for example, prostate cancer, right? We know that females don't have a prostate, so therefore the females will be contributing towards that, and that's just how it works. There's an element of what we call cross subsidy, but I started to pay valid for exactly, and how do you find that balance? So it is an quite interesting day.
Even during the COVID era, those were some of the best, but also the worst of times. But
the best of times and the worst of times.
It was great for actuarial work. So.
Very interesting.
I know it really was. We also saw that coming through in the exams.
They were asked very sort of COVID specific question,
which I think would have been a struggle if you were not in the industry and dealing with the complexities on a daily basis. So some interesting times now. Healthcare is quite you almost need a sort of a calling for it. It's like you said, it's emotional.
It is emotional.
It's more than just an actuarial
undertaking.
It's dealing with humans.
It is, and the thing is, it's as we said earlier, because it's so emotional. People value health insurance very much so, in the sense that they're like, it protects my life. And I think something that I did when I worked in product design is sometimes when I would design a product when experiences start emerging, I'd go into the data and be like, how's everyone doing? Are we all claiming? Are we all getting the benefits we want? Like, it was one of those things where I was like, it's like, for me, as much as there was always numbers, there was always people. And I was like, okay, once the people are on this product, let's go check everyone's doing fine, you know. And in healthcare, there is that aspect where you feel like you're protecting people. And that for me was always very, very, very motivating. Even though you're like a small subset of a much bigger system, you are still helping keep that system sort of cohesive and sustainable.
And such a core part of it. I mean, we do play, I mean, everything that, I mean, claims management, marketing, everything just comes back to the actual aspect of it. So yeah, we definitely do play a key role in it. But sure, but what's interesting about healthcare is that if you're not in it, it doesn't make sense to you.
Because it's not I wouldn't say it's an illogical space, but there's so many sort of different stakeholders who all have different sort of emphasis. So it's kind of like a patchworky kind of industry, because you're like, okay, this makes sense as to what we should do, but now like someone else has a different emphasis, so we're going to do it differently, even though it doesn't necessarily make sense. So it is, I think that's why the health fellowship is also particularly difficult.
Yeah.
Because as you say, the industry changes all the time, and stakeholders and sort of their view of things does impact how health insurance and medical aid sort of plays out in the South African space.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, fellowship also, what's interesting about it is that it's not just medical aid. It's actually about 50% of the exam is medical aid.
Yes.
The other 50 is health insurance, which is not big in South Africa.
Yes.
But they do test it a lot. And yeah, that also just brings a different aspect to it. You know, how health insurance is in the rest of the world, which makes us more, I guess, attractive to the rest of the world, in that we not just focus on the regulation of South Africa, but we actually understand healthcare in different and how it works in different spaces, in different countries. So that's also.
I think, in future podcasts, we definitely are going to discuss healthcare in a lot more detail. And I think, as you said, like the South African healthcare space is very complex.
Yeah.
And because you have your medical aids, you have health insurance, you then also have NHI on the scene. And then you have the government sector. So there's sort of very different sort of almost, I don't want to call them silos, but in some ways they are separate.
Right, yeah.
And the level of care that you get in each of those spaces is vastly different. And the funding models are so different, and the role that actuaries can play in those spaces is immense. You know, there's an immense amount of impact that you can make. So we will definitely speak to that.
I love it.
But I just want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you for being so open and sharing your story, because I think you're not alone in the struggles that you have had to overcome. And I think it's important for people to hear that becoming an actuary is hard, but also it's incredibly rewarding, and the life is worth it in the end. And also, my big takeaway from today's podcast is the mentorship aspect of it, because I think that's not something that's spoken about enough. And I really would encourage people to either get a mentor or be a mentor, because it's an incredibly life-giving space.
Yeah, it is. I think it's rewarding on its own.
Yeah.
Besides being an actuary
and develop a different skill set.
Yeah.
You know, it's not as analytical as some of the other spaces that we're in,
which actually makes you better at your job as well.
I think so. I mean, soft skills I don't think can be underplayed.
Yeah, I know.
So,
and we're not known for soft skills.
No, we're nice, but we're pretty good.
It's good to develop that.
Sure.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you. And to our audience, thank you for listening, and we will see you in our next episode. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review on your preferred streaming platform. If you'd like to interact with us more or add questions or topics to our pool of ideas, please follow our Instagram page at ASForActuary or email us on asforactuary@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Take care.